In 1921, the city of Charleroi was part of Belgium's industrial heartland. Yet, having suffered 4 long years of German occupation during World War I, its hundreds of factories were struggling for power. Despite Belgian neutrality, Germany's invasion of 1914 was followed by a thorough dismantling of Belgian industry. It was part of what historians sometimes call the rape of Belgium. To help drag the nation's economy back to its feet, a state-of-the-art power station was proposed. The enormous power plant IM.
In the process of generating power, typically steam engines are utilized. To make steam, you need water. And when you make steam, that water gets quite hot. To create new steam, you need to take the hot water, cool it down, and recreate steam.
The power plant was one of the largest of its kind in Europe. At its heart was a dramatic cooling tower, designed to cool the water back down and produce more steam-based energy by burning coal.
We all recognise a cooling tower when we see one. That's because they've got that characteristic shape. It's called a hyperboloid, this 3D form that's quite wide at the base, and then it kind of funnels in before coming back out again at the top. The reason they have this shape is because as the air, the warm air, is drawn up through that tower, it's accelerated through that funnel where it narrows, and that draws more air in from underneath, cooler air, which does the job of a cooling tower.
To produce steam-based energy, the tower was able to cool an incredible 480,000 gallons of water every minute. But this was only possible because of the unique use of its cone-like hyperboloid shape.
The hyperboloid shape of a cooling tower is extremely effective in terms of heat transfer between the hot water and the rising air. In that way, the design has persisted through time. It's a very classical and effective way to do what you need to do.
For all its simplicity, the tower itself was no easy build. The hyperboloid shape was not simply a matter of styling, but a brilliant solution to creating mass without weight.
So creating these large, flowing, beautiful shapes is actually quite challenging, because if any of you have ever tried creating that shape just on a pottery wheel at, that size, it's really hard. You're trying to use formwork and molds to create this. You need to change the way the mold fits the higher you go so that you get your curvy shape. You're at a height as well, and you're trying to pour concrete down here. And then think about doing all of that without computers. So you're basically sitting there with a pencil and a piece of paper, working out what you need to do, and then doing it on this really grand scale.
The plant started operating in 1921. Hot water from the plant's machinery was blasted into the tower through its central vent. It was collected in hundreds of shallow channels, designed to increase its surface area and lower its temperature rapidly, with extreme economy.
We're using this principle that hotter air is less dense and therefore lighter, and cooler air is more dense and therefore heavier. And so what happens in these towers is that the hot air rises up and the cool air stays at the base. And the shape here helps and gives it a bit of an aerodynamic quality to allow this flow to happen very smoothly.
Through the interwar period, the new plant successfully helped power huge industrial expansion in Belgium. From 1940, however, Belgium was again under German occupation, and the plant's output was diverted to serve their Nazi overlords. In the post-war years, it continued to serve Belgians, and by 1977, it was the main source of energy in the Charleroi area. Yet engineers at the time had no idea that hanging over its future were 2 deadly byproducts. Lurking in the channels of the tower was a killer disease.
Inside a cooling tower, it's warm and it's damp, and at the exact temperature in those conditions, they can become a breeding ground for Legionnaire's disease, which can be fatal.
However, the tower continued to operate effectively for decades without any fatalities. Yet its days were still numbered. The coal-powered plant was also producing alarmingly high levels of carbon dioxide. A report found it responsible for 10% of the total CO2 emissions in Belgium. This was followed by Greenpeace protests in 2006, and a year later, it was forced to close down. Considered too unsafe and contaminated to be repurposed, the site lies abandoned. Today, the futuristic appearance still amazes the few people prepared to penetrate its daunting maze of concrete beams. It is now being preserved as an icon of design for future generations.
After decades of being seen as a piece of industrial engineering, its beauty has actually shone through, and that's the reason they now want to keep it.
Now nearly a century old, Power Plant IM and its iconic cooling tower show that when engineers get a design right, it becomes timeless.
For me, I just love the mathematical and structural perfection that these towers represent.